New Haven was the kind of place that most people in the galaxy forgot about. It was a small settlement sitting on a frozen planet at the very edge of human space. Only 3,000 people lived there, and they were the kind of folks who wanted quiet lives away from the busy core worlds. The planet was so cold that people needed heating systems running all the time just to stay alive. Commander Jake Sullivan was in charge of the colony's defense. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had served in the military for 20 years before coming to New Haven. Most days his job was boring. He checked systems, filed reports, and made sure everything was working. Today started like any other day. The defense center was small. It had 3 old computers, one communication system that barely worked, and a single defense platform floating in orbit above the planet. That platform was older than most of the colonists. It looked like junk, and honestly, most people thought it was junk. Lieutenant Laura Martinez was Sullivan's second in command. She was young, smart, and good at her job. She sat at one of the computers, going through the morning reports. Everything was normal. The heating systems were working. The farms were producing food. The research labs were doing their studies. Just another boring day on a boring colony. Chief Engineer Ryan Brooks was out checking the geothermal plants. These plants pulled heat from deep underground and turned it into power. Most of that power went into keeping the colony warm. The rest powered the lights, computers, and other basic systems. Brooks was checking the temperature readings when something strange happened. The long-range sensors started beeping. Brooks looked at his handheld device and frowned. 3 ships were coming toward the colony. They were moving fast, really fast. And they weren't broadcasting any identification signals. That was bad, really bad. Brooks immediately called the defense center. Sullivan answered right away. Brooks told him about the 3 ships. Sullivan's face went serious. He told Brooks to get back to the colony right away. Then he turned to Martinez and told her to pull up the sensor data. The data showed 3 large warships. They were military vessels, no question about it. The design was Krell. The Krell Dominion was a powerful empire that had been expanding aggressively. They conquered small colonies and weak species. They were testing humanity, looking for weaknesses. And New Haven looked very weak. Sullivan activated the emergency alert. A loud alarm echoed through the entire colony. People stopped what they were doing. They didn't panic. They had trained for this, even though nobody really thought it would ever happen. Everyone started moving to their assigned shelter locations. Parents grabbed their children. Workers left their posts. Scientists saved their research and headed for the underground bunkers. Within 5 minutes, the streets were empty. Everyone was safe underground. Or at least that's what it looked like. Sullivan watched the ships getting closer on his screen. Martinez was tracking their approach vector. Brooks had made it back and was standing next to them, breathing hard from running. All 3 of them knew what was about to happen. They had prepared for this day. They just hoped they would never see it. New Haven had been a colony for 42 years. In all that time, nothing exciting had ever happened. No pirates, no raiders, no alien contact, just farming, research, and the daily struggle to survive on a frozen rock. The colony was supposed to be unimportant. It was supposed to be safe because nobody cared about it. But someone had found them. Someone had decided that New Haven was worth attacking. Sullivan couldn't understand why. The colony had nothing valuable. They grew some crops, did some research, and kept to themselves. There was nothing here worth fighting over, unless the Krell didn't know what they were really dealing with. Unless they had made a terrible mistake. Sullivan looked at Martinez. She looked back at him. They both knew the truth. They both knew what was really hidden beneath the ice and snow of this frozen world. The 3 Krell warships were now close enough to see with the naked eye. They were huge, dark shapes against the stars. Each ship was bigger than the entire colony. They had weapons that could destroy everything on the surface in minutes. They had shields that could take a beating from almost anything. Sullivan took a deep breath. He had been a soldier for most of his life. He had fought in battles. He had seen friends die. He had killed enemies. But that was a long time ago. He had come to New Haven to retire, to live out his days in peace. It looked like peace was over. Martinez started typing on her keyboard. She was entering codes, long strings of numbers and letters that unlocked systems that had been dormant for years. Brooks moved to another terminal and started doing the same thing. They were preparing. They were getting ready. The Krell ship stopped moving. They were now in orbit around the planet, high above New Haven. They were in perfect attack positions. They could hit any part of the colony they wanted. Sullivan knew they would probably send a message first. That's what aggressive species usually did. They wanted to gloat. They wanted to make demands. And sure enough, the communication system beeped. An incoming transmission? Sullivan nodded to Communications Officer Nicole Chen. She was sitting at the third terminal. She opened the channel. A face appeared on the screen. The Krell commander looked like a lizard mixed with a shark. His skin was gray and scaly. His eyes were black and cold. His mouth was full of sharp teeth. When he spoke, a computer translated his words into English. The voice was mechanical and emotionless. The message was simple. Surrender now. Leave the colony and gather in designated areas, except that New Haven now belonged to the Krell Dominion. If they refused, the Krell would destroy everything. They had 10 minutes to decide. Sullivan listened without saying anything. His face showed no emotion. When the Krell commander finished talking, Sullivan asked one simple question. Did the Krell know what kind of colony this was? The commander looked confused. He said New Haven was an agricultural settlement with no military value. Sullivan nodded slowly. Yes, that was true. But did they know what New Haven grew? The Krell commander's confusion deepened. Why did it matter what crops they grew? Sullivan just smiled. It was not a nice smile. Then the transmission ended. The Krell had cut the connection. Sullivan turned to his team. Martinez and Brooks were ready. Chen had her hands on her controls. All around them, systems were coming online. Systems that nobody outside of Earth's high command knew existed. Systems that were about to teach the Krell a very expensive lesson. Sullivan spoke 3 words into the colony-wide communication system. Those 3 words changed everything. They activated protocols that had been planned for years. They told everyone in the colony exactly what to do. The words were simple: Code Winter Protocol. The 3 Krell warships hung in space above New Haven like birds of prey. Inside the lead ship, the Krell commander was feeling very satisfied with himself. This would be an easy conquest, a small human colony with no defenses. His superiors would be pleased. He might even get promoted. The commander looked at the tactical display. His ships were in perfect positions. They could fire on the colony from 3 different angles. Even if the humans had hidden weapons, which they probably didn't, they would be overwhelmed. 3 warships against 1 old defense platform. It wasn't even a fair fight. Down on the surface, things were happening that the Krell couldn't see. In the shelters beneath the colony, people were not huddling in fear. They were moving with purpose. They were taking positions at control stations. They were checking weapons and systems. Every single person in New Haven was military. Some were active duty. Others were retired. But all of them had training. All of them knew how to fight. The farmers were actually combat engineers. The researchers were weapons specialists. The teachers were tactical officers. The whole colony was a carefully constructed lie. New Haven didn't grow food crops. Well, it did, but that wasn't the real purpose. The real purpose was to test new military technology. The colony was a secret research and development facility. Everything about it was designed to look weak and unimportant. That way nobody would bother investigating too closely. The geothermal plants that supposedly just provided heating were actually massive power generators. They could produce enough energy to run weapons that would make a battleship jealous. The communications array that barely worked was actually a sophisticated military network. It only pretended to be weak. The old orbital defense platform was the biggest lie of all. It looked ancient because it was supposed to look ancient. But inside that rusty exterior was some of the most advanced defensive technology humanity had ever created. It was a prototype. A test bed for systems that would eventually be installed on real warships. In the defense center, Sullivan watched his screens as systems came online. All around the colony, beneath meters of ice and snow, things were moving. Massive hatches were opening. Platforms were rising. Weapons were powering up. And the Krell had no idea. Martinez was coordinating with the tactical teams scattered throughout the colony. Each team controlled a different weapons system. Railguns, missile batteries, laser arrays, point defense systems. All of it was hidden. All of it was coming online. Brooks was managing the power distribution. The geothermal plants were running at maximum capacity. Energy was flowing to every weapons platform. The colony's heating systems were temporarily shut down. Nobody would freeze in the next few minutes, and that's all the time this would take. Chen was linked into the military communication network. She could talk to every station, every team, every individual soldier in the colony. Everyone was ready. Everyone was waiting for Sullivan's order. The calm in her voice was impressive. She had done this drill 100 times, but this time it wasn't a drill. Above the colony, the Krell commander gave the order to fire. His weapons officer locked onto the orbital platform. A warning shot first. Show the humans what they were dealing with. Make them afraid. Then they would surrender for sure. The lead Krell ship fired. A bright beam of energy lanced out and hit the orbital platform dead center. The Krell expected to see an explosion. They expected the old satellite to break apart. Instead, the platform's shields absorbed the hit easily. The Krell weapons officer stared at his display in confusion. The commander ordered him to fire again. More power this time. The weapons officer complied. Another beam, brighter and stronger, hit the platform. The shields held. In fact, they seemed to be getting stronger. That wasn't possible. Old satellites didn't have shields like that. Down on the surface, Sullivan was watching the Krell attacks on the orbital platform. The shields were performing perfectly. The energy from the Krell weapons was being absorbed and redirected to strengthen the shield matrix. It was beautiful technology. It had taken 5 years to develop. Now it was proving its worth. Sullivan looked at Martinez. She nodded. All weapons were ready. All teams were in position. All systems were green. It was time to stop pretending. It was time to show the Krell what they had really found. Sullivan gave the order. His voice was calm and clear. Fire all weapons. Execute defensive pattern alpha. Eliminate all hostile targets. Martinez's fingers flew across her keyboard, sending the commands to every weapons platform. Around the colony, the ice began to crack and shift. Huge sections of what looked like natural terrain split open. From beneath the frozen surface, weapons emerged. Railguns rose on massive hydraulic lifts. Missile silos opened their hatches. Laser turrets swiveled into position. The Krell commander saw the movement on his sensors. For a moment, he couldn't process what he was seeing. The entire colony was transforming. What he thought was a defenseless settlement was actually a military fortress. He realized his mistake in that moment. But it was already too late. The railguns fired first. These weapons used magnetic fields to accelerate projectiles to incredible speeds. The rounds they fired were moving at a significant fraction of light speed. At those velocities, nothing could stop them. Not shields. Not armor, nothing. The lead Krell ship was hit by 4 railgun rounds almost simultaneously. The first round punched through the ship's shields as if they weren't there. The second and third rounds tore through the hull, creating massive holes. The fourth round hit something critical, probably the power core. The ship exploded. The explosion was massive. Pieces of the Krell warship flew in all directions. Some of the debris was big enough to see from the ground. Sullivan watched it all on his display without emotion. 1 down, 2 to go. The second Krell ship tried to maneuver. Its captain was smart. He immediately recognized that they had flown into a trap. He ordered his ship to retreat at maximum speed. But the orbital platform was ready for that. The platform's main weapons activated. These were plasma cannons, a technology that was still experimental. They fired bolts of superheated matter contained in magnetic fields. When those bolts hit something, they released enormous amounts of energy. The effect was devastating. 3 plasma bolts hit the second Krell ship. The first one collapsed the ship's shields. The second one melted a hole through the armor. The third one went inside and exploded. The ship broke into 3 pieces. All 3 pieces were still exploding as they tumbled through space. The third Krell ship was now completely alone. Its commander watched in horror as his 2 companion vessels were destroyed in seconds. This wasn't supposed to happen. The intelligence reports said New Haven was defenseless. The reports were clearly wrong. Very, very wrong. The third captain made a decision that would save his life, at least temporarily. He ordered full retreat. Maximum power to engines. Forget about dignity or honor. Forget about the mission. Just get away from this nightmare as fast as possible. His crew didn't argue. They were all thinking the same thing. The ship turned and accelerated away from New Haven. Its engines glowed bright blue as they pushed to maximum capacity. The captain was already composing an emergency message to send back to Krell space. His superiors needed to know about this. Humanity was more dangerous than anyone had realized. Down in the defense center, Sullivan watched the third ship fleeing. He looked at Martinez. She checked her tactical display and shook her head. The ship was too far away for the railguns to hit reliably. The orbital platform's plasma cannons were still recharging. It looked like the third ship might escape. But Sullivan wasn't about to let that happen. He couldn't afford to let even one Krell ship escape to report back with accurate information. The secret of New Haven needed to be protected. Well, partially protected anyway. The galaxy would learn that New Haven could defend itself. But they didn't need to know exactly how strong the defenses really were. Sullivan gave another order. Launch long-range missiles. Full spread. Make sure nothing gets away. Martinez nodded and sent the command. Around the colony, more hidden hatches opened. These ones were missile silos buried deep in the ice. Missiles began launching. They rose from the ice on pillars of fire, their engines roaring even in the thin atmosphere. One after another, they climbed into space. There were 12 missiles total, each one carrying a warhead designed specifically to defeat advanced shields. The missiles were smart. They had their own sensors and targeting computers. They could track moving targets and adjust their course in flight. They could also communicate with each other, coordinating their attack for maximum effect. Humanity had spent billions developing these weapons. Now they would prove their worth. The fleeing Krell ship detected the missile launch. Its sensors screamed warnings. The captain ordered his defensive systems to engage. Point defense lasers activated, trying to shoot down the incoming missiles. The lasers were good. They were very good. They destroyed 2 missiles, then 3, then 4. But there were 12 missiles, and the Krell point defense could only shoot down so many. 8 missiles remained. The Krell crew was firing desperately now. They destroyed 2 more missiles. Then 1 more. 5 missiles were still coming. That was more than enough. The missiles split up as they approached. They came from different angles, making it harder for the point defense to track them all. 2 more fell to the Krell lasers. But 3 got through. 3 was overkill, but Sullivan wanted to be sure. The first missile hit the Krell ship's rear shields. The shields held, but they were weakened. The second missile hit 1 second later, in almost the same spot. The shields collapsed. The third missile went straight through where the shields had been and hit the hull. The explosion was bright enough to light up the night sky over New Haven. Sullivan checked his chronometer. From the moment the Krell had fired on the orbital platform to the destruction of the last enemy ship, exactly 6 minutes and 43 seconds had passed. He made a note in his log. Around the colony, the weapons began retracting back into their hidden positions. The railguns lowered on their hydraulic lifts. The missile silos closed their hatches. The laser turrets folded back down. Within minutes, everything would look normal again. Just a quiet little colony on a frozen world. The massive hatches that had opened in the ice slowly closed. Camouflage systems reactivated, making them invisible again. Snow began to drift over the disturbed areas, hiding any trace of what had just happened. Nature would do the rest. Sullivan authorized the all-clear signal. Throughout the colony, people began leaving their battle stations. They would return to their normal roles. The farmers would go back to farming. The researchers would return to their labs. The teachers would prepare for classes. Life would continue as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. For the first time in 42 years, New Haven had been forced to reveal its true nature. 3 Krell warships had attacked. All 3 were now debris fields orbiting the planet. The secret was partially out. But that was okay. That was part of the plan too. Chen was already writing the after-action report. It would be sent through encrypted channels back to Earth. The report was dry and factual. 3 Krell warships attacked New Haven colony. All 3 were destroyed. Time of engagement, 6 minutes and 43 seconds. Human casualties, 0. Colony cover maintained. That last part was important. The colony's cover was maintained. Yes, the Krell now knew that New Haven could defend itself, but they didn't know the full extent of the defenses. They didn't know about the underground bunkers that could survive a nuclear strike. They didn't know about the backup power systems. They didn't know about the secret escape tunnels. Most importantly, they didn't know that New Haven was just one of many such colonies. Throughout human space, there were dozens of settlements that looked weak, but were actually military strongholds. Some were testing grounds like New Haven. Others were forward bases disguised as civilian outposts. All of them were ready to defend humanity. Brooks powered down the enhanced systems. The geothermal plants returned to normal operation, providing heat and basic power to the colony. The weapon platforms went into standby mode, ready to activate again if needed but consuming minimal power while dormant. Everything returned to its peaceful appearance. Martinez secured her tactical systems and locked them behind multiple layers of encryption. She stretched, feeling the tension leave her muscles. The battle had been short but intense. Her heart was still racing. She looked at Sullivan and allowed herself a small smile. They had done well. Very well. Sullivan stood up from his chair and walked to the window. Outside, the colony looked peaceful. Lights glowed in the habitation domes. The streets were empty because people were still in the shelters, but they would come out soon. Life would return to normal. This frozen rock would go back to being forgotten and ignored. He thought about the Krell crews on those 3 ships. They had just been following orders. They had thought they were attacking a helpless target. They never knew what hit them. Sullivan felt no guilt about their deaths. They had come to conquer. They had come to kill or enslave 3,000 people. They got what they deserved, but he did feel something. Not quite satisfaction, but maybe vindication. New Haven had been built for exactly this scenario. The planners back on Earth had predicted that eventually, someone would attack a frontier colony. They had decided to turn that attack into a demonstration. A warning to the galaxy: don't underestimate humanity. The warning had been delivered. 3 Krell warships destroyed in under 7 minutes. That news would spread. Other species would hear about it. Some would be deterred. Others might become more cautious. A few might see it as a challenge. But all of them would think twice before attacking human colonies. 3 days after the attack, Earth's diplomatic corps sent a message to the Krell Dominion. The message was delivered through official channels, formal and polite. It expressed regret about the unfortunate incident at New Haven Colony. But the politeness was just a thin layer over a very sharp blade. The message included detailed sensor logs from the battle. The Krell could see exactly how their 3 warships had been destroyed. They could see the weapons emerging from the ice. They could see the railgun rounds tearing through their shields. They could see the plasma bolts melting through their armor. The data was very clear and very frightening, but the really scary part came next. Earth's diplomats explained that New Haven was one of humanity's weakest defensive installations. It was primarily a training facility for testing new military technology before deploying it to more important locations. The message helpfully included a list of 12 other colonies that appeared similarly vulnerable. The implication was clear. If the Krell thought New Haven was weak, they should think very carefully before attacking any other human colony, because they had no way of knowing which colonies were actually defenseless and which ones were heavily armed fortresses in disguise. Every frontier settlement could be another trap. The message ended with an invitation to formal peace talks. Earth was willing to discuss borders and trade agreements, but the invitation came with a reminder. Humanity had several hundred colonies throughout known space. Some were real civilian settlements. Others were military bases. The Krell had no way to tell the difference until it was too late. Back in Krell space, military commanders studied the data from New Haven. They watched the recordings again and again. They analyzed the weapon signatures. They calculated the power requirements. The numbers were disturbing. Very disturbing. If New Haven was a weak colony, what would a strong one look like? The Krell had been planning a major offensive into human territory. They had been assembling a fleet of 30 warships. After seeing what happened to 3 ships at one weak colony, they began to reconsider. Maybe humanity wasn't as soft as they thought. The Krell weren't stupid. They had built an empire through careful calculation of risk and reward. They attacked when they had overwhelming force. They retreated when the odds turned against them. Right now, the odds didn't look good. They decided to accept Earth's invitation to peace talks. News of the battle spread through the frontier. Merchants and traders carried the story from system to system. Each telling added new details, some true and some imagined. The core facts remained the same. A small human colony had destroyed 3 Krell warships in minutes. Other species took notice. The galaxy had many predatory empires, not just the Krell. They all watched to see how humanity would respond to aggression. The message from New Haven was loud and clear. Attack humans at your own risk. Even the weakest-looking colonies might turn out to be death traps. Pirates and raiders began avoiding human territory. Before the battle, frontier colonies had been tempting targets. Now they were dangerous unknowns. Nobody wanted to be the next example. The lesson was too expensive. 3 warships destroyed, hundreds of crew killed, all in less than 7 minutes. On New Haven, life continued normally. The colonists went about their daily routines. Children went to school. Adults went to work. The farms produced crops. The research labs conducted experiments. To any casual observer, nothing had changed. The colony still looked small, poor, and unimportant. But beneath the surface, things were different. The weapons platforms were maintained more carefully now. The power systems were tested more frequently. Everyone had renewed their combat training. They had proven that the defenses worked. Now they needed to make sure those defenses stayed ready. Sullivan received a message from Earth. It was encrypted and came through military channels. The message was short and to the point. Well done, the brass on Earth were pleased. The demonstration had worked perfectly. New Haven had done exactly what it was designed to do. The message also included new orders. Continue normal operations. Maintain cover as a civilian colony. Be prepared for possible retaliation, though intelligence suggested the Krell were too shocked to try again. Monitor for any other threats. Report anything unusual. Sullivan acknowledged the orders and filed them away. He looked around the defense center. Martinez was at her station, monitoring sensors. Brooks was checking power levels. Chen was listening to communications traffic. Everything was normal. Everything was quiet. That evening, Sullivan walked through the colony. He passed the habitation domes where families lived. He saw children playing in the heated streets. He watched researchers hurrying between labs. Everyone looked relaxed and happy. They had been through something scary, but it was over now. A young woman recognized him and waved. Her name was Katie Phillips, and she worked in the agricultural section. She thanked him for keeping everyone safe. Sullivan nodded and told her she was welcome. But inside, he knew the truth. She had kept herself safe. She was a trained soldier just like everyone else here. He continued his walk, thinking about the future. New Haven had been lucky. The Krell had attacked with only 3 ships. If they had sent more, the outcome might have been different. The colony was well defended, but it wasn't invincible. There were limits to what they could handle. But that was okay. The point wasn't to be invincible. The point was to be dangerous enough that nobody wanted to take the risk. The point was to make enemies think twice, to make them wonder if that weak-looking colony was actually a trap, to make them choose easier targets elsewhere. Sullivan reached the edge of the colony and looked out at the frozen landscape. The sun was setting, painting the ice in shades of pink and orange. It was beautiful in a harsh sort of way. This frozen rock had been his home for 5 years now. He had come here to escape war. Instead, war had found him, but it had been a short war. 6 minutes and 43 seconds. That was all it took to defeat 3 warships and send a message to the entire galaxy. Not bad for a colony that most people forgot existed. Not bad at all. He turned and walked back toward the center of the colony. Tomorrow would be another normal day. Reports to file. Systems to check. Training exercises to run. The boring routine of military life disguised as civilian living. But that was fine. Boring was good. Boring meant nobody was shooting at them. And if someone did shoot at them again, well, New Haven would be ready. The weapons were maintained. The power was ready. The people were trained. They had proven they could defend themselves. They would do it again if needed. As many times as necessary, because that was what humans did. They survived. They adapted. They built defenses that looked weak but were actually strong. They set traps for the unwary. They made their enemies pay a high price for aggression. And they never ever gave up without a fight. 2 weeks after the battle, a merchant ship arrived at New Haven. The captain was an independent trader named Marcus Webb, who regularly brought supplies to frontier colonies. He was human, born on Mars, and he had been trading in this sector for 15 years. He knew everyone and heard everything. Webb brought the usual supplies: food, medicine, equipment parts, and luxury items that made life on a frozen rock more bearable. But he also brought news, and the news was fascinating. The story of New Haven's defense had spread far and wide. It was the talk of every trading post and station. Sullivan met with Webb in the colony's small trading hall. The captain was a cheerful man with a round face and a ready smile. He unloaded his cargo while telling Sullivan about all the rumors he had heard. Some of the stories were almost accurate. Others were wildly exaggerated. One version claimed that New Haven had destroyed 5 Krell warships. Another said it was 10. A few stories insisted that the colony had some kind of superweapon that could destroy entire fleets. One particularly creative tale suggested that New Haven was actually a disguised battleship that could lift off from the planet if needed. Sullivan listened to all of this without commenting. He neither confirmed nor denied any of the stories. The more confused people were about New Haven's actual capabilities, the better. Let them imagine superweapons and hidden fleets. Fear of the unknown was often more effective than fear of the known. Webb also reported that the Krell Dominion had become much more cautious about expansion. They were negotiating with Earth instead of conquering. Other aggressive species were also reconsidering their plans. Nobody wanted to be the next example. The galaxy's predators had learned that humanity's prey animals could bite back. More interestingly, Webb said that human colonies throughout the frontier were being treated with new respect. Traders were offering better prices. Local authorities were more cooperative. Even pirates were giving human settlements a wide berth. The reputation earned at New Haven was benefiting all of humanity. After Webb left, Sullivan called a meeting with his senior staff. Martinez, Brooks, and Chen gathered in the defense center. Sullivan shared everything the merchant had told him. They discussed what it meant for New Haven and for their mission going forward. The consensus was clear. They had achieved their objective perfectly. New Haven had demonstrated that human colonies could defend themselves. But they had also maintained enough secrecy that nobody knew the full extent of their capabilities. The balance was exactly right. Martinez raised an important point. Now that New Haven was known to be dangerous, would the colony still be effective as a testing ground? Would enemies avoid them entirely? Sullivan thought about this. It was a valid concern. If nobody attacked, they couldn't test defenses. But Brooks disagreed. He argued that the effectiveness of a deterrent couldn't be measured by how often it was used. It was measured by how often it prevented attacks. If New Haven never faced another assault because enemies were too scared to try, that was a success, not a failure. Chen added that there were other ways to test military technology besides actual combat. Simulations could be improved now that they had real battle data. The weapon systems could be refined based on their performance against the Krell. The colony could continue its mission without needing another attack. Sullivan agreed with all of these points. New Haven would continue as planned. They would maintain their cover as a civilian colony. They would keep testing new technologies. They would stay ready for threats that might never come. And if enemies did come, well, they knew what would happen. Life in the colony settled into a new rhythm. The immediate aftermath of the battle had been tense. Everyone had been waiting for retaliation. But as weeks passed with no new threats, people relaxed. They went back to their normal routines, though everyone remained a bit more alert than before. The agricultural section continued growing their pharmaceutical crops. The yields were good this season. The research labs made progress on several projects. One team was working on improved shield generators. Another was testing new types of armor. A third was developing better sensors. The children in the colony went to school like children everywhere. They learned reading, math, science, and history, but they also learned things that children on core worlds didn't learn. They learned how to operate weapons. They learned tactical thinking. They learned to survive in hostile environments. Every child on New Haven was being prepared for the day they might need to defend their home. One evening, Sullivan was invited to dinner at the home of Kate Phillips and her husband Danny. They had a daughter named Sophie, who was 8 years old. Sophie was fascinated by the recent battle and asked Sullivan many questions about it. Sullivan answered carefully, telling her what she was cleared to know. He explained that the colony had defenses that protected everyone. He told her about the importance of training and preparation. He emphasized that violence was always a last resort, but when it was necessary, you had to be ready. Sophie listened carefully. Then she asked if the Krell would come back. Sullivan told her honestly that he didn't know. But if they did, New Haven would be ready. The little girl seemed satisfied with this answer. She went back to eating her dinner, secure in the knowledge that the adults would keep her safe. Watching Sophie, Sullivan felt the weight of his responsibility. 3,000 people depended on him to keep them safe. 3,000 people lived on this frozen rock because they trusted that the defenses would work. He had proven that trust was justified. But he couldn't let his guard down. Not ever. After dinner, Sullivan walked home alone. The streets were quiet. Most people were inside their warm homes. The temperature outside was 40 degrees below zero. The heating systems hummed, maintaining livable conditions inside the domes. Above, stars sparkled in the clear, cold sky. He thought about all the other colonies like New Haven scattered throughout human space. Some were testing grounds like this one. Others were forward bases. A few were actually civilian settlements with hidden military capabilities. Together, they formed a network of defenses that protected humanity's expansion into the galaxy. It was a clever strategy. Instead of building obvious military bases that everyone would watch, humanity disguised its strongest defenses as weak civilian outposts. Enemies looking for easy targets would find deadly surprises. Aggressive species would learn to be cautious. The galaxy would learn to leave human colonies alone. Sullivan reached his quarters and went inside. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat down at his desk. He had reports to write, as always, but for a moment he just sat there thinking. They had won a battle. The war, if there was a war, was far from over. But they had sent a message, and that message would echo through the galaxy for years to come. Don't attack humans. Don't assume weakness means helplessness. Don't test colonies without knowing what you're facing. Because the peaceful farmers on that frozen world might actually be soldiers, the old defense satellite might be state-of-the-art, and the colony that looks defenseless might destroy your fleet in under 7 minutes. 6 months passed. New Haven Colony continued its quiet existence at the edge of human space. The battle with the Krell became part of the colony's history, a story that parents told children. Life moved forward. Seasons changed, as much as they changed on a frozen world. The sun rose and set. People lived their lives. Sullivan noticed that colonists walked a little taller now. There was pride in their steps. They had been tested and had proven themselves. The colony wasn't just a cover story anymore. It was a real community that had defended itself successfully. That meant something. Martinez received a promotion. Earth's military command recognized her excellent work during the battle. She was now a captain. Sullivan was proud of her. She deserved the recognition. She had coordinated the defensive fire perfectly. Not a single shot had been wasted. Every weapon had hit its target. Brooks made improvements to the power distribution system. During the battle, he had noticed some inefficiencies. The geothermal plants could provide more power if the distribution network was optimized. He spent 3 months redesigning the system. Now it was 20% more efficient. Chen expanded the communications network. She added more redundancy and better encryption. If enemies tried to jam their signals, they would fail. If anyone tried to intercept their communications, they would only hear noise. The colony's communication security was now among the best in human space. New colonists arrived. Earth was expanding the population of New Haven slowly and carefully. Each new arrival was thoroughly vetted. They were all military personnel, of course, but they also had civilian skills. The colony needed farmers, teachers, doctors, and engineers who could also fight if necessary. One of the new arrivals was a woman named Lisa Grant. She was a botanist specializing in cold weather crops. She was also a former Special Forces operator with combat experience. She fit right into the colony's dual nature. Her days were spent improving crop yields. Her evenings included weapons training. Sullivan met with her during her orientation. He explained how New Haven worked. She listened carefully and asked good questions. She understood the mission. She was committed to the colony's success. Sullivan was pleased. Lisa would be a valuable addition to their community. The peace talks between Earth and the Krell Dominion concluded successfully. A formal treaty was signed. Both sides agreed to respect each other's borders. Trade agreements were established. There would be no war between humans and Krell. The incident at New Haven had convinced the Krell that war with humanity would be too expensive. But peace with the Krell didn't mean peace with everyone. The galaxy had many dangerous species. Some learned from the Krell's mistake. Others didn't. Sullivan knew that New Haven might face another attack someday. The colony remained ready. The orbital defense platform received an upgrade. New plasma cannons were installed, more powerful than the ones used against the Krell. The shield generators were improved, able to withstand even more punishment. The old satellite was becoming a proper battle station. though it still looked like junk from the outside. Additional weapon systems were hidden around the colony. More railguns were buried in the ice. New missile silos were constructed in remote areas. Laser arrays were installed on the tallest structures. Every addition was carefully camouflaged. To external observers, New Haven still looked like a small, struggling colony. Sullivan sometimes wondered what would happen if the truth about New Haven was fully revealed. If the galaxy knew exactly how well defended this colony was, would it lose its effectiveness? Would enemies simply avoid it entirely? Or would some species see it as a challenge? He decided it didn't matter. The important thing was that New Haven served its purpose. It protected its people. It tested new technologies. It sent a message to potential enemies. Whether that message was based on partial truth or complete revelation, the effect was the same. Don't attack human colonies. 1 year after the battle, the colony held a memorial service. They remembered the Krell who had died, acknowledging that they were soldiers following orders. They also celebrated their own survival. The service was quiet and respectful. It wasn't about glorifying violence. It was about honoring the cost of safety. Sophie Phillips, now 9 years old, read a poem she had written. It was about living on a frozen world, about the beauty of the ice and stars, about feeling safe even at the edge of known space. Her words were simple but moving. Many adults had tears in their eyes when she finished. After the service, Sullivan stood outside looking at the stars. Martinez joined him. They didn't speak for a while. There was something comfortable about the silence between two soldiers who had fought together. Words weren't always necessary. Finally, Martinez spoke. She asked Sullivan if he ever regretted coming to New Haven. He thought about the question. He had come here to escape war, to live a quiet life. But war had found him anyway. Did he regret it? No, he had found purpose here. He had found a community worth protecting. Martinez nodded. She felt the same way. They both had left their old lives behind, thinking they were done with military service. But you never really stopped being a soldier. The training stayed with you. The instincts remained. When danger came, you responded. That's just who you were. They went back inside, where a small party was happening in the community hall. People were eating, drinking, and talking. Children were running around playing games. It was a normal scene, the kind you would see in any human settlement. But everyone in that room was a warrior. Everyone was ready to fight if needed. That was humanity's secret weapon. Not the railguns or plasma cannons, not the shields or missiles. Those were just tools. The real weapon was the people. Every human colony, from the strongest to the weakest, was full of people who would defend their homes. Full of people who could be farmers one day and soldiers the next. Other species in the galaxy organized their societies differently. They had separate military and civilian populations. Warriors were warriors, farmers were farmers. The two groups rarely overlapped. But humans were different. Every human could be both. That flexibility made them dangerous. Sullivan looked around the room at the people of New Haven. They were scientists, farmers, teachers, engineers, and parents. They were also soldiers, tacticians, weapons operators, and defenders. They were whatever they needed to be. That was what made humanity strong. The party continued late into the night. Eventually, people started heading home. Sullivan was one of the last to leave. He walked through the quiet streets back to his quarters. Tomorrow would be another day. Another day of maintaining equipment, running drills, filing reports. The boring routine of military life disguised as civilian existence. But Sullivan didn't mind the routine. Boring was good. Boring meant everyone was safe. Boring meant he could do his job without anyone dying. He had seen enough death in his career. He was happy to spend his days checking systems and filing paperwork, if it meant the colony remained peaceful. He reached his quarters and went inside. The small apartment was comfortable. He had made it his home over the years. Books lined one wall. Pictures of friends and family decorated another. A window showed the frozen landscape outside, beautiful in the starlight. Sullivan made his final log entry for the day. Days since last hostile contact, 365. All systems green. Colony secure. Population healthy. Mission continuing as planned. He saved the entry and shut down his computer. He looked out the window one more time before bed. Somewhere out there, beyond the stars, other species were making decisions. Some were learning to respect humanity. Others were plotting. Some saw humans as friends, others saw them as prey. All of them were learning the same lesson that the Krell had learned. Humans were dangerous. Not just their technology, though that was impressive. Not just their weapons, though those were effective. Humans were dangerous because they never gave up. Because they could be peaceful farmers one moment and deadly warriors the next. Because their weakest colonies could destroy fleets. New Haven Colony would continue its quiet existence. The people would farm their crops and conduct their research. Children would go to school. Families would have dinners together. Life would go on, normal and peaceful. And beneath it all, hidden under ice and snow and careful lies, the defenses would wait. Ready. Always ready. Because that was what humans did. They prepared. They planned. They built defenses that looked weak but were strong. They set traps for the unwary. They protected their own with fierce determination. And they made sure that anyone foolish enough to attack would pay a price they could never afford. Sullivan climbed into bed and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Probably just another quiet day on a frozen rock at the edge of space. But if it brought something else, if it brought danger and threats and enemies, then New Haven would be ready. They had proven that once. They would prove it again if needed. The colony slept. The defenses watched. The stars shone down on the frozen world, and in the cold and dark and silence New Haven waited. Patient, ready, dangerous.